So first, let's start with you. First, I'm Scott Greenstone. I cover politics for KUOW. I host Sound Politics, our new-ish podcast on politics. So thank you all so much for coming out here. I know that I just met you each one of you, and asked you where you drove out from, but I'm going to ask you to do it again. This is the first question. Who are you? Where do you live? How long have you lived in Washington State? And how involved in politics are you? Elizabeth, let's start with you.
My name is Elizabeth Dahl. I live on Bainbridge Island, so I did not drive, in fact. I walked onto a ferry, and then I took light rail to get here. And I've lived in Washington my entire life, born and raised. And I am extremely involved in politics. I know Georgine and John because of politics. I'm on the state Republican committee with Georgine. I have been involved in politics since I was 17 and worked on a congressional campaign. And now I work full-time for a nonprofit helping depolarize the political culture.
That was perfect length, perfect level of summary and depth. So thank you. Ilya, same question.
Yeah, my name is Ilya. I live in West Seattle. I've been in Washington since 2017, and I'm not particularly involved in politics. I'd like to become more involved in politics, but I vote every election, and that's about the extent of my political activity.
Great. Thank you. Roger, same question.
I'm Roger Droz. I'm a precinct committee officer up in Mukilteo. I have been in Washington 99% of my life. My first job out of college was with Wang Labs in Lowell, Massachusetts, and then I was down in Portland for 2 years. Relevant to tonight's discussion, I have worked with the Snohomish County Auditor on the elections since the 2016 presidential primary. And that's pretty much it.
Great. Thank you. John.
My name is John Peoples, hometown Wilmington, Delaware. This time around, I've been out here in Puget Sound since about late 2009, with 15 months in the late 90s living on Capitol Hill. When I first returned to Washington, I was not at all involved with politics except to just get out and vote. A very important thing to me wherever I live throughout the country is to sign up to vote within a week of moving in. Very important to me. I was having a talk with a friend, and he thought I would be interested in going to the King County GOP dinner way back in 2011, 2012 or so. And little by little, I got more involved, was a precinct committee officer, ran for state house in the 43rd district, right in the center of Seattle. And more and more ran for city council. And I did get 8.9% of the vote against Nicole Macri in the 43rd.
I thought I recognized your name.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I like to be involved, especially when it comes to having conversations with people. I'm okay with talking to people from the other side of the aisle. I crave sitting down with the same sheet of music, the same set of facts. You're welcome to disagree, but as long as we got the same set of facts, we have a solid starting place. I've been taking a little bit of time off from politics. I've moved to Everett now, with the exception of one issue that we might get to later on.
Great. Sherwin.
Great. Hi, I'm Sherwin. I was born and raised here in Washington. I was actually born on First Hill Swedish Medical Center and have been here my whole life except for several years out in the Midwest and Northeast. I live with my wife and 3 kids in Bellevue, and we are part of a small Baptist church in Kirkland, so a lot of my life is on the east side, but I do come into the city for work as a data scientist in Seattle. As far as my involvement in politics, I actually am involved in a very unique way relative to, I think, a lot of you. So I am a local transportation writer, so I'm involved very heavily in transit advocacy, and most of the people in those circles tend to be Democrats, of course. So I spend a lot of time with folks on the other side of the aisle, learning from them, giving my perspective, but having still kind of pretty steadfast views when it comes to conservative values, even on that issue. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
So not a lot of Republican urbanists is what you're saying.
They're out there, but
there's one. Georgine.
Hi, my name is Georgine Ferris, and I'm from Arlington. And took us about an hour and a half to get here tonight with all that traffic. I got involved in politics when my husband and I went to our son's Army officer commissioning. And when I saw my beautiful boy and his beautiful class stand up and pledge their very lives, their life. Now, I'm a mother. That's my baby. Pledging his life to the Constitution and to serve this nation and to total strangers, because we don't know everybody in this country. And when I saw that, something happened in me. And I knew that more was going to be required of me. Because I'd always thought of myself as patriotic. I had a 4th of July picnic every year. People always come to my picnic. But that day I knew more was going to be required of me. And I came home and I thought about it. I prayed about it. I thought, what do I do? My son is going to lay his life down. I don't know if any of your parents, but that rocked me to my core. And it frightened me because I didn't want to lose my boy. You look around the room and go, are you really? My kid would die for you. And that sounds judgmental. I don't mean to be. But I was like, he was okay with that. And he talked with me. And we had really discussed him and going into the military and talking about that as a family because we became a military family. And anyway, I came home and I prayed and I looked around and said, how do I get involved and what do I do in politics? But I felt a shift, and not just use the word politics, because that can have an ugly connotation sometimes. But I want to be involved in government. And what does that mean? And what does the government mountain look like? And how can I be an influence for what is good and godly? And I got involved. I am the state committee woman for Snohomish County. I'm also PCO, so I knock on doors and I inform my neighbors, hey, these are the candidates, these are the issues. Let's get involved.
Great. We're going to stay with you for the next question.
Okay.
When did you first vote and who for, and how have you changed since your first vote?
I've always voted, and I've always voted Republican. Gosh, I can't remember what my first vote was. I'm sorry. Okay. I was born and raised right here. I'm older. I gotta think back.
I actually struggled with it, and I was like,
that's a good question. I need to go look back when I was 18. I'm 66. So who would that have been?
That's okay. If you remember, we'll come back to you. Sherwin.
Yeah, my first election, I think, was 2008. Big election, obviously. So I voted for John McCain then, and pretty much down ballot Republican for Dino Rossi and all the names that now I don't remember. Mm-hmm. I would say over the years, as of course I mentioned, I got a lot of exposure to people on the other side of the aisle as it concerned transportation specifically. But, exposure to different views and just nuances in political positions. So I think I've always remained a conservative, more so thinking through things independently. So I would align myself a little bit less as a Republican now, but I'm definitely still more in that kind of libertarian conservative mold. But generally when I vote from a very independent, very objective standpoint. So on occasion, depending on the level, if it's appropriate and depending on the issue, I may vote for people who are more Democratic leaning, but generally as you go higher up to federal offices, I'll tend to lean more toward Republican voting.
Yeah. Okay, John.
I have two first votes. The first was 1976, when my recently divorced father took me to a local church in Memphis to vote for President Ford in a voting booth. And that was really cool. And then my second first vote was really a no vote at college in 1990 in Indiana. I received my state of Delaware absentee ballot the evening before it was due back home in Delaware. Needless to say, it didn't get filled out. And then I think the next opportunity I had was in 92.
Georgine, you said that Ford was your first vote too.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I graduated in 75, it would have been 76. Yeah.
I was like, okay, we switch off who gets the first bite at these apples, right? We're going to move this way and that way. So different folks will be blindsided by questions, hopefully. Roger.
Coming down here tonight, I thought I was going to feel like John McCain being the oldest person in the room. I think that my first vote was 72 for Nixon's second term.
And have you changed at all since then?
I voted third party instead of voting for Reagan for her first term. But other than that, I've pretty well been Republican all the way along.
Oh, all right. You were one of the few people to vote against Reagan first time around. I think that electoral map is so red when I look at it. Ilya.
Yeah, very different from you guys' votes. I've historically voted Democrat throughout kind of my life. I voted, I think the first presidential election, I voted for Kerry in 2004. And yeah, I've changed obviously quite a bit since then. I think just, in this moment in time, and this kind of just reflects my personal opinion, it seems like things are not going so well with the Democratic Party. It seems like there's been, I just don't have a lot of trust in kind of the Democratic Party. I think a lot of their principles have gone really far to the left, especially compared to like where Kerry and Obama were in 2008. So that's kind of what's shifting my stance.
Yeah. Great. Elizabeth.
So my first election was actually 2013. It was a state Senate special election for Jan Angel because I turned 18 a few weeks after the 2012 presidential election. So that leaves me out of voting in that contest. So instead, the following year, I got to actually vote for a candidate whose campaign I was working on, which was wonderful. It was also the only thing on that ballot, which is a pretty unique first voting experience. I would say over time, I've become much more pragmatic in my approach to determining who I vote for and what represents the best vote in the place that I live. But I also moved from a swing district to a solid blue district. And so as a conservative, that has made voting much more difficult and much less enjoyable. I'm usually voting for people who I have a lot less in common with than I did when I lived in a swing district.
Yeah. I was hoping someone would bring up a local election. My best friend didn't vote in 2016, and I got him to vote the next year in the Seattle municipal election, and I felt really good about it. And I think that was his first vote. Next question, Elizabeth. How has living in Washington shaped your political views?
Living in Washington has immensely shaped my political perspective because I started in politics as a teenager working in a blue district as a conservative. I was an intern on Bill Driscoll's congressional campaign in the 6th Congressional District, the first time that Derek Kilmer ran for Congress coming out of the 26th. And it was interesting, I actually knew Derek Kilmer because I lived in Port Orchard. He was representing the 26th at the time and as a state senator. The race that my candidate the next year then won. And so I was somewhat familiar with him through my business interactions. My parents owned a business. I was very active in the business community in South Kitsap, even though I was working for his opponent, because ultimately I agree with his opponent more than I agree with him. And now in Bravery Angels, the organization that I work for, I find myself collaborating with Derek Kilmer on some things. And so it's been a pretty interesting journey across the last dozen years or so. I forgot what.
How has living in Washington shaped your political views? That's the question.
I learned very quickly. So when I started in politics, I was a very black and white thinker. I was still very young, obviously, and I didn't have any political experience. I just had a lot of head knowledge, and the culture that I'd been raised in taught me that one form of engagement was better than others. And it turns out that that method of engagement does not actually persuade people. In fact, it alienates them. And that actually, if you vote for the person who you like the most, they're probably not going to win. And you actually might be taking votes away from someone who is more like you than the person who ultimately gets elected and would have a better chance of winning if you supported them. And so working in politics and living in a blue state as a conservative has really shaped the way that I think about voting and the way that I think about the people I vote for.
Ilya, same question. How has living in Washington shaped your political views?
Yeah, so when I moved up here, I was living in California at the time. I was living in the Bay Area. I came up here partially due to the kind of like what I thought was like too far to the left, like political climate in California. I think taxes were a big part of that, right? Like I wanted to move up here, not pay income tax, just have like a more like a libertarian minded government is kind of like what I thought I would find. And that's not exactly what I found. And so I've kind of seen how, you know, like single party rule is really a huge problem. I think if I was to live in a different state, I might vote differently. But, you know, living here and seeing kind of the solutions that that our government makes to the problems don't always actually solve the problems, and they're often they often perpetuate the problems further. I'm thinking about things like crime in particular, where it seems like we kind of go in this kind of circular manner when we're not actually addressing the crime. We're kind of addressing ancillary issues. So that's, you know, in a way that's basically what I've seen. And I think, yeah, the single party rule is really the biggest issue for me. We've had justices all democratically elected. We've had, 12 years of Inslee. We've had an entire, everybody in the everybody in the House and state Senate. Those are all primarily Democratic chambers. So, yeah, we don't get a lot of diversity in thought, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Roger.
My experience is almost opposite of that. Washingtonians are fiercely independent. We insist on the open primary. Nobody is happy with our present primary system. Mm-hmm. Now, as near as I can tell, I'm a third-generation Republican on both sides of the family, most of the time. One of the many things that I do is I've been hired to supervise the production of ballots for a county in Virginia, and you almost feel like giving the Crocodile Dundee line. You call that a ballot? They maybe have 2-3 things on it. When was the last time our ballot was that short? We always have a gazillion initiatives. We get more chance to put in more input here than practically anywhere else. I hope that we can still be friends because we sure love our politics here.
It's funny. I'm talking about this on the podcast tomorrow. Like, how long our ballots are going to be. Can
I just address that? I agree with you that Washingtonians are independent. I just think our government is less so.
Yes, mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Roger, how has living in Washington shaped your political views, being a third-generation Republican on both sides?
I think perhaps it's more being from Eastern Washington, the red side of the state. The blueness comes from the city of Seattle, basically. You take a look at the electoral maps for statewide offices, and you'll see King, Snohomish, Pierce, and the rest of the state's red. And that's what's bringing up what we're talking about here.
John, same question. How has living in Washington shaped your political views?
Surprisingly, it's galvanized my political beliefs. essentially fish out of water. I'm another conservative city boy, and love the city. I'm from the city, and I'm completely outvoted even in Silver Lake in Everett. And so it's hard to get away. So I have no choice but to engage. And over the years, I've been very vocal and busy being present in the as nicely as I can, with some slips along the way, in the professional lives of my state representatives and congressional representatives. Managed to get a sit down 20 minutes with Representative Jayapal about 3-4 years ago to bring her a list of grievances from her Trump supporting constituents. And I've seen since 2010 a change occur in Seattle. Changes in public policy, changes in perceptions and the realities of public safety. And so, what I consider to be some shenanigans and a great frustration in the initiative process, where a great deal of effort, time, and money can go into an initiative that can just get wiped off the books at a moment, just with a stroke of a pen by the Supreme Court, which strikes me as rather baffling. I am grateful in Washington for the fact that the 9 executive positions are essentially independent. And that, I believe, goes right back to the very beginning of the state of Washington. State Constitution dissipated all those powers so that one man cannot do so much damage. And yet, the one-party rule has a lot of them thinking along too many of the same lines.
It's interesting that Dave Reichert and Bob Ferguson, the candidates for governor, do actually agree on one thing, and they think that the superintendent of public schools should not actually be on the ballot, which I think is interesting and a different conversation. But Sherwin, how has living in Washington shaped your political views?
Yeah, I empathize with a lot of what I've heard already. I grew up in the Seattle suburbs, so even though it's not quite deeply blue as Seattle is, certainly a pretty dark shade of blue, even in the suburbs. I remember when I was in high school in my AP government class, the teacher had us all take the political compass test, and I was by far the most conservative student in the class, so they arranged the seating accordingly. So I was like, ironically, on the far left side of the classroom instead of the far right side. But I took that as kind of a badge of pride, quite honestly, because I had always felt growing up where all my peers were quite progressive, that I had some pride in being like a minority in the sense of how I thought politically, as well as when it came to my faith. So I actually had a blog when I was that age. I think I called it The Life of an Everyday Minority. Being a minority, again, and not as it comes, not in terms of my skin color or anything like that, but in terms of what I believed as a Christian, but also what I believed politically as well. And so, even though all my classmates were, all in for Obama, I kind of just had this really strong stand to point out people's errors and why McCain was a better candidate. I think, like Elizabeth, I was a very black and white thinker back then. And then over the years, as I mentioned before, as I went into college, I went to UW, got a lot of exposure to the way people thought about different things, and while still disagreeing with them, I had to understand that, especially as someone who's very passionate about public transit and urbanism, I had to, ally in a sense with a lot of those people. And so, while not necessarily compromising on certain ideals and values, I certainly learned, and I love being here in Washington, especially in the Pacific Northwest, and I go to work every day in downtown Seattle. I see a lot what's going on, but I love the city. I wouldn't ever relegate it to a place of despair, as a lot of people have done. And so it's a place where certainly there's a good exchange of ideas. I do think, as Ilya said, that there is a lot of one-sided thinking. It does feel like Seattle's a big echo chamber at times. And I think just being a conservative in this place, I really want to push people to kind of go outside the echo chamber from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Great. Georgine, same question. How has living in Washington shaped your political views?
Well, our state is so beautiful. I mean, it is beautiful. Even though I was in a lot of traffic on the way down. to look at the mountains and to see some of the water in different parts, from up north as we're driving down here. It is exquisitely beautiful. And I love that. I've been born and raised here, and I want to see us continue to keep this state beautiful, but with common sense. And so living here, what has shaped some of my thinking are watching and noticing the fruit of such bad liberal policies, from environmental to educational to genital mutilation of children, things I'm fiercely opposed to, because I am black and white on many issues, and that would be where the Judeo-biblical values come into play. I want to protect those values. I want to protect children. I want them to have a childhood. I want us to have a better education system where kids actually learn to read and write, because we're so far behind in math and reading. I want kids to get an education, not indoctrination. And so my belief system is verified when I see the policy, the fruit of what I think is bad policy in Washington, and when I see it manifesting and not benefiting our kids, not benefiting society, and not helping us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I've got a quick comeback.
Yeah, John.
If I may. Real quick, funny story. About 4 years ago, I had the privilege of participating in a Department of Neighborhoods Citizens Participation Academy held at the Hughes, what's now the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Center down in the Central District. And at one point, we were asked to line up diagonally across the room in accordance with how we compared what we looked like to who works at City Hall. And very obviously, the point was to separate the black participants from the white participants. And that's exactly what happened. I stood in the center of the room, and they all asked, "Why are you standing in the center of the room?" And I told them, "I'm your friendly neighborhood conservative. Nobody at City Hall looks like me."
Scott, I wanted to add something. I feel like I left something fairly important out hearing, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Which is actually hearing from what Sherwin and Ilya and Roger said. Maybe it's because I'm younger, but I've also felt more like Seattle is a huge echo chamber. Even though I grew up in a very conservative, what I now sometimes call fundamentalist adjacent background, as soon as I stepped outside of that as an adult, I've likened it to politics hitting you over the head with a 2x4 all the time. And it forces me as a conservative and it forced me very early on as a conservative adult to decide that I either needed to figure out why I believed what I believed and whether or not that was correct, or I needed to be like the rest of the people around me, or I needed to bury my head in the sand and stop saying what I believed and hide. And I have a lot of friends that have chosen the hide option.
We're going to go back to Georgine for this next question. What is the number one policy issue driving your vote?
I think public safety. I think that's a huge issue because I think years ago I was told government's number one job was to protect was public safety. And I think that our cities and towns are becoming less safe all the time. We have rampant crime, we have homelessness, we have drug addiction, we have, robbery. We see burning down of buildings with people who disagree with something. I just think, good grief. And I think public safety is very important. I think we need to bring back the rule of law. I think you can do that with common sense and without being, too harsh, as some would say. I mean, and that's one of the great initiatives that passed, that became law, is the police being able to pursue criminals. And we have to understand that if we look at society and we see policies that we've been working or in action and they're not working, it's time to say, okay, let's address this. Let's address this. We just keep throwing money at the homeless. We just keep throwing money at drug addiction. It's not getting better. I mean, to have human feces on the street, I mean, really, you could not have told me that 10 years ago or whatever. I mean, to see us crumbling down, degrading into a third world nation is very disheartening to me. Very disheartening. And we have to have standards. We have to have a rule of law so we can all live together. I mean, you come to a four-way stop and there's a stop sign, it's not because anybody wants to be cruel or nobody's got a bad racial decision there. It's public safety. It's common sense. I'm going to stop. You're going to stop. And then we're taking turns to drive. It's so that we can all live together in a more harmonious, organized fashion. So I think public safety is very important to me. Taking care of criminals and getting the homeless off the street, getting them the help they need, drug addiction help. There's a very good policy in the city of Marysville. Mayor John Nearing is doing it. I think a lot of legislators or city mayors need to look at that. It's working and it's very good.
Sherwin, same question. What's the number one policy issue driving your vote?
Can I have more than?
I have more than one also, but
yes, everyone will have more than one, but if you can pick one.
Yeah. So to clarify, we're talking about any level of voting in like local, state, federal.
We can. This is good. This is adding nuance into the conversation. I think that we're interested in local issues. Public safety is one that we hear a lot. So yeah, local. The way you fill out your ballot locally.
Yeah. This is really hard for me because there are a lot of issues that drive kind of my decision making when it comes to voting. I think certainly public disorder and things of that nature are important. I'm now cheating. I realize I'm adding a bunch of stuff. I don't actually point to a single policy position. I think my general posture when it comes to voting is to think about limited government and just thinking through what do I believe our government should have control over and what they shouldn't. And I know there's a lot of detail in that, but I think I would just leave it at that.
You picked a good through line. It's going through with all the other issues.
Yeah. Yep.
Good. Yeah. John.
Number one is public safety, like Georgine said, is the number one purpose of coming together, forming a government, is so that we can all live in mutual peace with each other and thrive. And for me, what that means is rather than only and always dealing with the criminals, those who break the rules, I've come to realize over the years as I grew up from being a child, always wanting things and wanting others to bend to my will, I've come to realize that it's my responsibility to learn how to fit in society. And it's my responsibility to manage my own behavior to ensure that I don't break the rules and break other people's peace. And that's something that we need to teach our children from the earliest ages on up so that we meet our neighbors in the government, the police officers, the policymakers, at least halfway. Currently, there seems to be a major imbalance in which current policy over the last 10, 15 years in Seattle, in which certain criminal acts have been allowed to go on without much consequence. And ultimately, it is a two-way street, but it also starts with education from an early age.
Great. Roger, same question. Number one policy issue driving your vote.
Well, just to be different, I'm going to pick taxes. I'm retired from a career as a software engineer, but in retirement, I'm a professional tax preparer. One of the other preparers in the office asked me last year, do you think we're headed for a state income tax? And my answer was, we're certainly sliding down the slippery slope. I can't, for the life of me, figure out why the courts have upheld the capital gains tax. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Washington Working Families Credit, which I type it into the same computer as I would as if it was a state tax return. And so we have negative income tax here in the state. You can even spin WACARES as a form of income tax. More on that later, I'm sure, if we get into any one of those topics, but I'll pick taxes as my number one issue because I have some expertise to offer on that.
Yeah, we will get into the initiatives. Ilya, what's the number one policy issue? If you had to pick one.
I think I'm going to follow up on what everybody else has said, but I guess the four that I have I've written them down actually, so I'm just gonna cheat here. So my top one is crime and policing. I'll expand on that for a very short period of time. Then homelessness and drugs, then education, and then cost of living, which is basically taxes. So those are kind of my four. And then I think in terms of crime and policing, I think violent crime has increased. I think I think I think Ferguson is to blame for that largely. That's kind of why I want to vote for Reichert. I think we are not locking up criminals. I think we are always trying to reduce the penalties for crime. I think they come out. I think there's recidivism. And then I think there's this interesting thing where we also reduce, there's some infringement on the Second Amendment rights, and we're reducing the number of police. So then it becomes kind of like what do citizens do who are dealing with crime, like either on their property or when they're out in the streets? And you do hear of muggings and attacks quite often, even in West Seattle, right, which is supposed to be a relatively safe part of Seattle. So those are kind of the concerns that I have.
Bob Ferguson is one of your neighbors over there in West Seattle, I think.
Sure is, although I see quite a few Dave Reichert signs.
Come on now. Come on.
Elizabeth, number one policy issue.
I'm going to sound like Sherwin because I have different number one issues depending on the type of race that I'm voting in. So very locally, like for municipal races, my top issue is housing. There's an enormous anti-development movement on Bainbridge, and I would like to be able to afford a house. And so I am very concerned about the development planning and the type of people that end up on the city council and choosing people who do or do not allow permits and the type of permitting and all of that. On a state level, public safety is my number one because as far as to my thinking, like I could care about the economy more, but at the end of the day, I could care about housing more. But at the end of the day, nobody's going to choose to move to somewhere that has more crime. Nobody is going to choose to start a business somewhere that has increasing crime rates, especially when a lot of the rest of the country has started to turn the corner and their crime rates have dropped precipitously. You have Seattle and Washington State that has dropped since we reversed the police pursuit law back to our 2019 standards, but not before. We had record high crime. Last year, there was record high number of murders in Seattle when the rest of the country had already turned the corner, and several major cities had significantly lower murder rates than Seattle and lower violent crime rates than Seattle. That is the single biggest problem to me that underlies all of the rest, solving all the rest of them.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned housing policy, more of the Republican urbanist alliance. I've reported on it.
Sherwin, I have to ask, do you know Maria Frost?
I do not.
Whoa, that's so weird. Okay.
Sounds like John does.
When I was reporting on the missing middle housing bill, I reported on the fact that a lot of Republicans liked it because it, removed regulations on housing, and a lot of urbanists liked it for the same reasons. There are 4 initiatives on the ballot. I'm going to start with you on this question, Elizabeth. I know you know them. I'm just going to run through them very quickly. One would repeal Washington's recently established capital gains tax. Another would cancel the cap and trade portion of the Climate Commitment Act, the carbon auction that sells the ability to pollute to industry. The Washington Cares program began in 2023 and added a mandatory payroll tax to every worker in the state. There's an initiative that would make this tax optional. And then there's one that would prohibit the state from banning or discouraging the use of natural gas. Which initiatives are most important to you and why, and how are you planning on voting?
Vote yes to pay less on all of them.
Amen.
Which one is most important is hard. I'm going to say that the natural gas ban is probably the most important one to me, reversing the natural gas ban and progress toward the natural gas ban, more specifically and accurately, because that's yet another increase in energy prices for enormous swaths of Washington. And even though it doesn't affect me personally right in this moment, because on Bainbridge, the natural gas pipeline doesn't actually cross over to the island. So if you want natural gas, you are actually on a propane tank. Nonetheless, it does matter to a whole lot of people around the state, and it increases the costs of energy across the board. Puget Sound Energy has a lot of natural gas holdings, and they will definitely be encouraging more customers to move into electricity rather than natural gas. Electric rather than natural gas. And that's a huge problem because just because I personally don't have natural gas doesn't mean that I think costs should be increased on restaurants or that costs should be increased on everyone else in Washington state who does have natural gas. It's a much more affordable type of energy than electric. And we should be giving Washingtonians the opportunity to use the form of electricity that is A, the most affordable, and B, the most resilient. In a lot of more outlying places in Washington, natural gas is way more resilient to natural disasters, weather, the problems that they run into, for example, in the mountains, than electricity, where being on electric versus natural gas could quite literally be the difference between life and death in the winter.
Thank you. Ilya, for initiatives, which one is most important to you, and how are you planning on voting? Yes to pay less, or no on some?
Yeah, I'm going to vote yes on all of them. I think of the ones that's most important to me, I think the opting out of the Washington Cares is probably the most important to me. I think I think it's a bad policy, right? The tax, you can't take it anywhere, right? If you leave the state, you can't take it with you. It's like $34,000 total. I mean, I have parents, they're elderly. I care about them very much, but I also know that $34,000 is like a month of like long-term care, right? Or like 2 months or 3 months or whatever. It's not a very long period of time. We should just put that money into a retirement fund instead. And then I also think the income tax, the capital gains tax, needs to be repealed as well. I think those are probably the most important ones to me.
Yeah. Roger, how are you voting on the initiatives?
I have something to say on all of the above, but I will focus on walk cares because that's the one I've studied the most. I am personally exempt from walk cares because I had just managed to secure a private long-term care insurance policy in time to qualify for the exemption. So somewhere through all the court challenges and so on, from when it was first enacted to when it actually went into effect, they dropped the possibility of the exemption. What the initiative talks about is being able to voluntarily opt out. The rationale behind walk cares is Washington was paying half of their Medicaid funds for long-term care. With an aging population, there was this big unfunded expense coming. So yeah, it's a drop in the bucket. What it's doing is it's going to smooth things out. Opting out of walk cares is not sound to meet the need. Opting out of a public mandate like that, once you've obtained your own long-term care insurance and met your responsibility, that would be a good initiative.
So will you vote no on that?
So I'm going to vote no on it.
Okay. What about the rest?
Oh, you're going to give me the floor for the rest? I've already told you my honest opinion of the capital gains tax. I can't. It's an income tax, so I would vote to repeal it.
And Climate Commitment Act?
Climate Commitment Act. I'm still thinking about that one.
Okay.
One of the things that I have seen in studying that is the state is raking in a lot of money. Now, if it was cap and trade, like money was going from the polluters to the people who weren't polluting, so it was kind of breaking even, less administrative expenses, that'd be one thing. But they're raking in lots of money and spending it on things like my Snohomish County PUD insert the other day proudly announced that they'd gotten a grant from the Climate Commitment Act that was going to allow them to give discounts on electric bill for low-income families. How's that reducing carbon?
And the natural gas ban, have you decided on that one?
I'm going to vote against. I'm going to
Vote for it.
to repeal the natural gas ban.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. I was just curious. Of course, you have assumptions, and I tend to think, Republicans will probably vote to repeal all of them. I shouldn't have assumptions, should I? John, should I? Did I assume correctly?
Mostly yes. I'm going to vote yes to repeal all of them. Thank you very much, Roger, for giving me something more to think about for my number one item, the WA Cares opt-out. I should think about it more. Haven't had the time to yet. But when it all came down last year, I was so incensed that I did not lift a finger. I was not going to let the state legislature make me jump through hoops to exempt myself from something. I'm annoyed that the money is being taken away from me. I currently have no expectation that I'll ever see any of that money again. And the good news, however, is I don't acutely need it right now, the money that's coming out of the paycheck. But that's in part due to decisions I make when I make my budget. So I am going to vote to repeal that one, but Roger's given me something more to think about in the years ahead. The next two are the capital gains and the cap and trade. The capital gains, while it does not currently apply to me, will not stay capital gains for long, nor will it stay at $250,000. Eventually, it's going to drop lower and lower and lower, and will ensnare more and more people. I
would love to jump in here and just note that in their majority decision, the Washington State Supreme Court advocated for the legislature to adopt an excess compensation tax that is somehow not an income tax, according to them.
So isn't an income tax just in the Democratic state policy?
Tax, it is.
Yes, they have talked about it for years. Yes.
Although they did pass the initiative banning a future income tax earlier this year.
Correct.
Sorry,
Yes, they did. I greatly appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to that. That's more in line with historical Washington State perspective and public policy on the issue. And lastly, the ban on the natural gas. I'm all for all of the above when it comes to energy, including the nuclear and the pedal power and whatever it takes to get the energy, all of the above. All of these things are taxes in a way. They are constrictions on commerce. All of them cost something, and they put artificial levers on the economy that eventually, if one thing were to break in the future, will cause serious damage. And I think the proponents of these, the laws that we're trying to repeal, have not fully thought that through. And lastly, in the end, it's my responsibility to make a budget for my own household and to be able to get by.
Yeah. Sherwin, which initiatives are most important to you, and how are you going to vote?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I actually have not been a huge initiative voter in the past, but I think for these, I'm probably inclined to vote yes for most of them. I think the one that I'd be more on the fence on would probably be the one around, the cap and trade one, just for two reasons. Number one is when it comes to issues around climate and environment, I'm probably I'm certainly no tree hugger, but I would be more sympathetic to, progressive thinking on this. My posture toward that is really that, and as a Christian, I believe in the sovereignty of God. I believe that this, whatever happens to the planet, that God has everything under control. That being said, I do believe we're called to be good stewards of the planet as well. The second reason would stem from just kind of my sympathy toward cap and trade as a concept. I actually like the idea when Obama proposed it back in, I think, 2009. Mostly because this idea of monetizing that system and taxing negative externalities, I think, is really a good solution I think we should look at in terms of like, how do we deal with this issue of carbon and pollution, while making sure that there is a system of incentives and disincentives for polluters. Now, that all being said, I would say if I had to rank the initiatives, number one would actually be the capital gains tax, because as many of others have said, I am deeply concerned about kind of the slippery slope. This could very easily turn into something where we see an income tax formally solidified. Now, people in Washington, especially my progressive friends, will often say, oh, look how regressive our tax system is. But frankly, when I talk to people, a lot of people like the fact that we don't have an income tax. And I think a lot of people enjoy the fact that, hey, you don't have to file a separate state tax return for every time you're doing your taxes. And I think just this notion that, when it comes to public funding, pushing for something that most of other states have, it's not a very good solution for me. So I think that would probably be the top of my list.
I do think, talking about independent Washingtonians, people are very proud that our state doesn't have an income tax, and I would be surprised if we ever did end up passing one. But I've been surprised before. Georgine, same question. Yeah, initiatives. Are you going yes on all of them?
Well, I was a signature gatherer on all of them. And I'm very much in favor of these initiatives. I think government is too big. Every one of these initiatives is a sign that government is too big. Every one of these initiatives is an issue. And it's showing that there is so much government overreach and government, into our business. I don't like it. I'm for freedom. I'm for liberty. I'm for government to stay out of my business. And this is just too much government overreach. And the people have said, the citizens have signed and said enough. And the government is supposed to be we the people. And we the people have said enough, instead of the government saying, this is how you're going to do it, you peons. And so I think, yes, pay less. I just think they're all extremely important because it's the principle of we the people, And so we are supposed to be a citizenry government, and it's a republic if what? We can keep it. And so we need to, in my opinion, stay free. And with the government overreach and with them mandating, which is not a law, by the way, and with them in every aspect of our business, it's just too much control. I don't like it.
Okay, this next one can be short if you want to explain, but it's okay if you just say a name. Georgine, who are you leaning toward for governor and why?
Dave Reichart, because obviously he's a Republican, and I believe in Republican values. And Republican values should be less government. It should be public safety. It should be, protecting our borders. It should be parents parenting their kids, not co-parenting with the government, things like that. And I believe Dave Reichart will help that.
Great. Sherwin.
Yeah, I would say Dave Reichart as well. I mean, I have long respected him since he was King County Sheriff. Just a really good record of service in Congress as well. I just, on a lot of policies, I just can't align myself with Bob Ferguson. His views on abortion, public order, crime, those things, I think I would go for Reichart.
John.
I've been looking forward to voting for Dave Reichart for many, many years. He has the public safety resume that his opponent cannot match. He also did not participate in this recent sneaky effort to invalidate all four initiatives that we'll talk about later, I hope.
Yeah. Roger.
Well, I'm in the Reichart camp, too, for the reasons mentioned. He did a fine job in Congress. I think he's a good, decent man, and he deserves our vote.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to vote for Reichart. I think, being a sheriff of King County, he understands, the needs of the state and kind of the criminal problems that we're having. I think he comes from a purple district, which kind of helps him kind of understand all Washingtonians. And I guess he's been getting hit really hard on the abortion stuff. And it seems to me like he's not really pushing for a abortion ban in Washington state. I don't think that's something that's even close to being in the pipeline. And I think having a mixed government will help put checks and balances on the extremes of both parties.
Yeah. All right, Elizabeth.
100% Dave Reichert. Pretty much everyone said all of the excellent reasons to vote for him. He has military experience and law enforcement experience. I called someone this spring on his behalf, and she asked me if I remembered all the way back during the WTO riots, watching him chase down a rioter on live TV and arrest them. And I had to break it to her that I was only 4 years old for the WTO riots. So I did not remember that, but she did and was incredibly enthusiastic about it. He understands the process of governing. He understands how the rule of law works and how the checks and balances and the different parts of our government work, both in Washington state and in different districts around the state. And so I think he will be a fantastic governor who can restore a lot of the excesses, restore balance to a lot of the excesses that have happened in the last 4 years. And frankly, that's what we're dealing with in large part. There have been problems for a very long time. Of course, we did not get here overnight, but there have been so many enormous, enormous changes just in the last 4 years that have demonstrably terrible consequences. And I think Dave Reichert is the person to undo a lot of them.
Can I just add something? I was originally in the primary a semi-Byrd supporter.
Yeah.
And so, because I am very conservative and I really liked what he had to say. But as a Republican and wanting to help the Republican slate, if you will, I am choosing to vote for Dave Reichert and hoping for the best. And being involved in the party, what's beautiful about that is it gives you access to our candidates and access to be able to share, hey, this is a concern I have, or this is a value I have. And can you listen to me and consider that? And I think that is something that's beneficial and that has helped me be able to share, insecurities or concerns you would have for your candidate. But I'm 100% behind Dave Reichert.
I was going to say, Elizabeth, you've been a strong Reichert supporter in much more pro Semi-Byrd circles than this room. I want to ask, which candidate are you leaning? I think we've also talked about this. Which candidate are you leaning for president, and why? Elizabeth.
I will almost definitely not vote the presidential contest.
Okay. Do you want to share any more? You don't have to.
Long story short is that Donald Trump is not conservative. That's particularly clear now. He doesn't seem to have an ideology to speak of. He is generally left-leaning on economics, whereas I am a free market, free minds, free markets conservative, have been for my entire adult life. He is not socially conservative in any way, shape, or form. He follows whatever he thinks is going to be the most popular in the moment, and that is not a good way to govern. We have an anti-majoritarian form of government in a lot of ways for a reason. I am a small R Republican, not just a big R Republican, and Donald Trump is not that. At the same time, I am a conservative. And Kamala Harris is not that in any way, shape, or form. She's actually on a pretty far left end of the Democratic
Farthest
Party.
left.
And I absolutely can't support really any part of that. And so that leaves me with nowhere to go. And in Washington state, we have a winner-take-all electoral college set up, which means that my presidential vote is entirely overruled anyway, because there's absolutely no chance that Donald Trump approaches anywhere near 50% of the vote here. And so I feel no guilt about not voting at the top of the ticket as long as I vote down ballot and make sure every single person that I know votes down ballot, and I very, very strongly, like, cannot tell you how strongly I encourage people to ensure that they are not letting a discouraging top of the ticket be a reason to not vote, because I think that that is the most important takeaway from that. I might have a much harder decision in terms of just who is the closer to supporting my ideals in politics, particularly in the wake of what Trump did after losing the election in 2020, and how he has behaved since then. If I lived in a different state that was proportional allocation, but we don't live in that state, and so here my choice is easy. I'm just not going to vote in the presidential contest.
Yeah. Ilya, same question.
So I haven't voted for Trump in 2016. I didn't vote for Trump in 2020. I didn't vote for Trump in the primary, but I'm going to vote for Trump in the
Good boy.
in the general. But I'm going to tell you what, it almost doesn't matter, right? Because Trump's not going to win Washington. So like it's nearly irrelevant. Do I like Trump? Not really. Do I like his like, I think he's a better governor. I think this is a referendum on Biden and Harris, though. No. And so that's why I'm voting for the Republican candidate, who is Trump, right? Like, I don't see this as a referendum on Trump because Trump actually had a pretty good 4 years.
Yes,
like,
he did.
2016 to 2020 minus COVID was actually pretty decent for the economy, decent for foreign affairs. Like, it was pretty good. Yeah. He just has a sneaky eye, and he has some not so great qualities. But in terms of like an executive, I think he did pretty well in 2016 to 2020. So I'm going to vote for him again.
Yeah.
And I think 2020 to 2024 was like not great. So, like, I think the Biden administration with Kamala was quite horrible. Bad. And I think the border stuff.
Come on.
Like,
absolutely.
That's bad. Mm-hmm. Right. We're getting 10 million people in a year, 5 million people a year. That's not wonderful.
We found the first time Trump voter.
I think
in West
I am.
Seattle.
I think I am. Yeah.
The only one.
Yeah,
Who knows though?
If it's interesting, I did vote for Trump in 2020, even though I didn't in 2016.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay.
Sorry, we're running short.
Because I agree with you that
time.
2016 to 2020 was pretty good. Yeah.
Roger.
I really had hoped somebody other than Trump would surface in the Republican Party, because during Trump's term, he was constantly under investigation, and that limited his effectiveness. He did well, but he could have done better if people had been talking about the issues rather than trying to impeach him all the time. Trump has emerged as the candidate. He did well in his first term. I'm voting for him this time around.
Amen.
John?
I took 2016 off at the top of the ballot. President Trump earned my vote in 2020 because he proved himself to be a very effective administrator and did good things. Just to name one is the Abraham Accords. Very clearly cared deeply about peace in the Middle East and found a way to do it. And so I'm looking forward to voting for him this year, and also looking forward to voting for Pete Serrano for AG, and thankful that we have the choice between Pete Serrano and Nick Brown.
Sherwin.
Yeah, I'm probably going to echo Elizabeth here and say probably sit this one out, and not because I want to, but I do feel like this feels like a repeat of 2016, which I did sit out on the presidential race. I did vote for Donald Trump in 2020, a little bit begrudgingly, but I recognize a lot of the same qualities of that administration that many people here have talked about. I think generally my disappointment with him, of course, in addition to some of his interesting qualities as a person and his traits, as Elizabeth said, he really just has betrayed some conservative values. I do not think he's pro-life. I think he has betrayed free trade principles. There are things that just about a lot of things in those areas that I have deep concerns with. Now, that being said, of course, I think I recently took one of those I Side With quizzes, and he came out at the top for me. Now, that I
have to vote
recognize
for him.
Come on.
it's a recognition too that there's a lot about that platform that I do agree with, but I think I'm also concerned, and then this was alluded to earlier, that the stuff about election denialism, I'm really not about that, and I think we have to.
It's true.
My concern really is that, is this the best candidate we could have come up with as a Republican Party? I think a lot of Republicans feel like, but he executed. I'll give him that. But of course, I just really wish we were living in an alternate universe where there was someone else.
I guess I'm just gonna jump in really quickly. Like it's yes or no, and that's just kind of it. Sitting it out
Republicans who
is
don't
like,
vote elect Democrats.
Well, not in the state.
we're not gonna vote Republican here. So
If I lived in a swing state, it would be a different conversation.
Georgine, I have no idea what you're going to say about
Well, I
that.
don't know if you noticed my earrings.
I saw.
And I have a Trump dress, should have worn, but I wasn't sure if I'd be safe in Seattle. But I am unequivocally, enthusiastically, and joyfully voting for President Donald J. Trump. I think he is amazing.
For a third time?
For a third time, yes. And I was a delegate at the RNC. I just came back, and that place was on fire. It was so exciting, and it was so uplifting. It was so patriotic. There was such a beautiful presence in the place, and it just gave me such a hope for tomorrow, and I'm 100% behind him. When he came to Washington State in 2016, the way our state treated him was unbelievable. And when he had the rally in Everett, I had the privilege of putting together the program. It was wonderful, and I think his policies are fabulous. I think what he did in Roe v. Wade by appointing the Supreme Court justices is as much as a human can do. I think putting life, because I'm very pro-life, and I will stand before God for that choice, but him putting it back to the states because it's a states' rights issue, and I think he did those things. Standing with Israel. I mean, the border, going to do away with the Department of Education. Praise the Lord for that. I mean, some of the stuff he's going to do is going to be great. I think he's been the greatest president that we have ever had. I really do. And I think his policies and his principles are America first. And I can't imagine anybody not wanting to be America first. I mean, the Biden administration, the amount of millions of dollars we send to the Ukraine and the flooding of enemies over the border is just unconscionable. And so, Donald Trump said he'll stop that day one. But I'm excited to vote for him.
We have time for one more. Is that right? Okay, great.
Let me squeeze in a quick factoid on the abortion issue. You hear the politicians talk, you would think that this is a solidly pro-choice state. The last time it was put before the voters was Initiative 120 in 1991. We had to wait till mid-December for the recount. The pro-choice side won by less than 0.5% of the vote. Now, of course, the pro-choice side said, mandate, this is a pro-choice state. Not so much when we had to wait for the recount. That was a squeaker. We got to admit that they won. But if the vote were taken today, it might be different.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting you say that, just because Dave Reichert has really, really said prominently he has ads saying, I'm not going to do anything about abortion. I have to imagine that he's looking at stats that maybe speak to strong.
Because it would have to go to a vote. It's a states' right issue. It's not his decision to mandate or be a dictator over our state.
That's right. Okay, last question here, and we're going to start with Georgine. Have you thought about any reactions or plans that the election outcome is different to your hopes? Bob Ferguson wins the governor.
God
Kamala
forbid.
Harris wins
Oh, Lord.
election. What have you thought about what you might do? Anything on the board here? Would you move out of the state? Would you move out of the country, etc.?
I can't move out of the state because my children and grandchildren are here. And this is my home. This is where I'm placed. These are my roots. I'll probably have a mourning party. People come over and let's mourn. But tomorrow's another day. I get up and pray and thank God for breath, thank God for life, and just keep fighting. give myself a few days to lick my wounds, but we can't give up. We cannot give up. And this state is worth fighting for. My children, my posterity, it is worth fighting for traditional biblical values, and that's a must. And that's something that I will do.
And it doesn't have to be moving out. If you have some other plans or something like that, Sherwin.
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, I firmly believe that whatever happens, Jesus Christ is still on his throne the day after.
Amen.
That's not going to change whatsoever. And yeah, I will certainly honor the results and respect whoever our new leaders are, even though I may vehemently disagree with, if the Democrats, if it's a clean sweep, certainly there will be some disappointment in the sense that, hey, we can't see some of our policy proposals come to fruition. As far as moving out of the state, I don't really see that as a thing. I've said before, I enjoy living here, and I don't want to go to a place where I am entrenched in an echo chamber. I've had a lot of really good friends move to red states the last few years, and they've had personal reasons for doing so. I'm just not there. I think I really want to be in a place where I can continue to engage people who are left and right of me and just have a really fruitful conversation about why we think about the way we do. And my two best friends they're pretty solid Democrat liberals, and I still have a great relationship with them. And so I really don't want to lose that. So I'll be around.
May I add something? If it turns out, opposite of what I would hope, decisions will have to be made about my grandchildren's schooling, where they would, where we would have their education, how that looks like, what that looks like, and how we're going to move forward because of the fruit, like I said, of what that produces. So we would have to really consider, okay, let's regroup, and how are we going to continue life as a Christian family who believes in parental rights, who believes in two genders, who believes, those things.
John.
All right. Well, if it doesn't go my way, I'll swallow that bitter pill, but I'll thank God for my blessings, absolutely. And I most definitely will go to work the next day, just like I did in 2020, unlike certain prominent Washington politicians who took a mental health day in 2016. If it doesn't go my way, I know policies are coming down the pike that I may not like. And of course, I've got to think to myself, how am I going back to fitting in with society, and how am I going to do my best to resist bad public policy in the most godly way I can muster?
Great. Thank you. Roger.
Well, the sun will come up the next day no matter what. In the state of Washington, you cannot count on the election result until at least Wednesday or Thursday after the election. So you got another couple days
to certification.
Root for your favorite.
That's right. Commissioner of Public Lands race, anybody? Still refreshing that.
Sue
Peterson. Herrera. Butler.
Sue Keel Peterson.
Great. Ilya, election outcome plans. You move out of West Seattle?
No, I think I'm going to stay. I have friends, I have hobbies. I like living here. I'm not going to flee the country or move to Venezuela or move back to.
But we'll be Venezuela, so you don't have to go there.
Which is where I was born, right?
Move to where?
Russia. I'm not going to do that, right? That's where I was born, like Soviet Union. I think I'm not. You know what? If I'm going to predict anything, I'm going to predict that the Dems win all the executive races and that the initiatives all pass. I'm gonna make that really bold claim.
We'll call you.
Help us, Jesus.
Let's see. I forget if I had another question. No, I think let's just Elizabeth. Election outcomes. If it's different than you hope.
Keep fighting, keep doing what I do with Braver Angels, creating spaces where progressives and conservatives can sit together and have conversations with each other about politics in a rational and reasonable way, learn from each other, and sometimes recognize the excesses and the imbalance that exists in Washington state. When I joined politics, we were almost a super minority in the state legislature. And I watched us work all the way up to an outright Senate majority and be just a couple of seats from a majority in the House. And now we're back at the verge of a super minority again. Politics tends to be cyclical. I have hope that in the long term, this is just another cycle, and that there is great fight that can be had nonetheless at the legislative and at the local levels. And when people move out of state, we only become more likely to lose those fights. Things don't get better by fleeing. So I plan to stay. I will say, like Georgine, I don't have kids or grandkids yet, but kids are in the game plan in the future. And my husband and I have long since decided that they will not be entering public school, even though we live on Bainbridge, which has one of the top 5 schools in the state, because the progressive indoctrination is real.
Yes.
From the anti-science policies on gender-affirming care for minors starting at 13 years old, to the completely counterfactual history. I literally ended up in an argument with my neighbor about the use of the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, because she was taught that the U.S. was in the wrong in public high school in
Anti-American
the 2010s
indoctrination.
on Bainbridge Island. I don't want my kids to have that kind of an education. And so whatever we do, it won't be public school.
Okay. And I just want you all to know we are asking the Democrats that question as well when we have them in, whenever that is happening, in September. Okay, a little ways. I wish we had time to get to more things. You're all very, engaged with politics, and so I can tell that we could talk about any number of races. John, I'm really sorry. But I want to thank you all for coming in. This was really instructive to me. I have to talk to politicians for my job, but I get to talk to you all, which is why I'm here after a 9 to 5. So thank you all so much. It was really nice talking to you and meeting you and getting to hear from you.
And thank you all as well. This is a great treat for me. I'm sure it is for the others as well, because we don't get this sort of attention a lot over here in Puget Sound.
Oh, we get attention. We get attention.
Well, thank you all so much.
This was a treat. This was fun.
Oh, I appreciate it. Well, good. I'm
for
glad
sure.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you all for making the drive out here, parking in the U District. Hopefully your husband.
He never showed up. I know.
He's still driving around.